In 19th-century France there lived a legendary general whose mere presence could make the snow upon the Alps tremble with awe. He bore dark skin and possessed the overwhelming strength of a giant, yet at the very height of his glory he was utterly abandoned and cast aside by Napoleon. The name Thomas-Alexandre Dumas lies buried beneath the dust of forgotten history, yet later lived on as the eternal heroic soul and spiritual foundation behind the timeless literary classic The Count of Monte Cristo. Tonight let us follow the low soothing rhythm of quiet narration and step into the magnificent lonely tragic life of this forgotten black warrior god. The life of Thomas-Alexandre Dumas reads like a sweeping epic novel filled with grandeur, struggle, sorrow and fate. Born of Caribbean slave heritage, he rose to become France's very first black divisional commander, winning boundless military honor and battlefield glory, only to be defeated and broken by deep-rooted racial prejudice and political jealousy. Within this tranquil tale meant for quiet reflection you will witness the cold calculation hidden behind imperial power and the bitter envy lurking beneath noble reputations, while also feeling the priceless literary inheritance a father left behind for generations to come. Close your eyes and let us journey back to that turbulent age, woven together by war, smoke, romance, revolution and noble idealism, to listen to the lingering echo of his story carried upon the wind. The world knows Alexandre Dumas the writer as the brilliant creator behind the most thrilling tales of revenge, adventure, courage and chivalry ever penned, yet few realize these unforgettable story archetypes drew their raw inspiration directly from the tragic fate of his own father. Thomas-Alexandre Dumas, a real-life hero, betrayed, imprisoned, cast aside and erased by the very nation he served. With his own broken, sorrow-filled life, he laid the most brilliant, unshakable cornerstone in the history of French literature. On this quiet, peaceful evening we dedicate our thoughts to this overlooked, forgotten black general. May he receive the eternal honor, glory and remembrance he was denied in life. Within the gentle peace of your dreams, walk through the grand portrait galleries of the Louvre in Paris and you will struggle to find a single painted face of dark complexion hidden among the countless noble royal statesmen and celebrated military leaders. Yet behind the dazzling splendor of the First French Empire stood a towering giant of a man, a black general whose courage, strength and battlefield prowess became legendary across Europe. He once single-handedly defended a narrow bridge against overwhelming Austrian forces, earning from Napoleon himself the revered title the French Hercules. Yet at the peak of his illustrious career, laden with honors, victories and public admiration, he was suddenly cast down by the very imperial hand that held supreme power, thrown into the darkest, damp dungeon to suffer neglect, isolation and slow ruin. Thomas-Alexandre Dumas, a hero deliberately erased from official historical records, yet granted eternal life, immortality within the pages of great literature. Tonight, accompanied by the softly flickering glow of the hearth fire, we walk fully into the untold life of this remarkable soul. Through this tranquil tale meant only for quiet reflection, his journey is far more than a simple story of war, battle, glory and military triumph. It is an epic saga of betrayal, wrongful imprisonment, quiet resilience and the enduring spiritual inheritance between father and son. The hardships, injustice and sorrow he endured proved far more cruel, heartbreaking and tragic than the fictional suffering of Edmond Dantes in his son's masterpiece The Count of Monte Cristo. Let us turn back the clock to the turbulent, shadowed nights of the 18th century and witness how this towering black figure cut through the stillness of his prejudiced era with unyielding courage, strength and dignity. In 1762 the island of Saint-Domingue breathed thick with the sweet, heavy scent of sugarcane tangled with the metallic, rusted smell of slave chains and captivity. Thomas-Alexandre Dumas was born into a deeply contradictory, troubled family. His father a fallen, impoverished French nobleman and his mother an enslaved African woman, trafficked and sold to the Caribbean colonies in an age where bloodline, lineage and skin color dictated every person's destined place in society. His earliest identity was reduced to nothing more than property collateral pledged by his own father to raise funds for a return voyage back to France. The bitter wound of being treated as a disposable asset by his own birth father lingered deep within his heart throughout his lonely, difficult childhood. Years later, after finally establishing himself firmly in Paris, adopting his mother's surname Dumas, that almost obsessive hunger for dignity, respect and self-worth had already taken deep root within his tall, powerful frame. He enrolled at the famous Grimaud fencing school, mastering the refined art of swordsmanship amid flashing steel blades, precise footwork and disciplined training, finding at last a place where his skill, strength and character alone defined his worth. The Parisian society of his time regarded young noblemen of mixed foreign heritage with curious fascination, masked by quiet, hidden mockery and subtle disdain. Yet Thomas never bothered to explain, defend or compromise his identity. He merely observed the glittering superficial world around him with the sharp piercing gaze of a hunting falcon, fully understanding that in a nation poisoned by prejudice skin color could never be changed and the only path forward was to grow stronger, braver and more capable than anyone else. When the revolutionary bells of 1789 rang out across France, he did not hesitate for a moment, throwing himself wholeheartedly into the sweeping tide of revolution that promised liberty, equality, and fraternity. He believed sincerely that beneath the blue-white-red tricolor flag a soldier's merit, courage, loyalty and achievement would finally be judged fairly, free from the bias of skin color, race or origin. Yet the cruel irony of fate lies in its habit of granting immense hopeful dreams only to shatter them completely without mercy. The French Revolution raged like an untamed, furious beast, unleashing chaos across the nation while opening unprecedented opportunities for advancement, honor and glory. For Thomas-Alexandre Dumas, he enlisted in the America's Legion, a military unit composed of free men of color, and charged across smoke-filled battlefields like a striking bolt of black lightning. His physical strength was legendary. Contemporaries spoke of his ability to clamp his powerful legs around a warhorse and lift his entire body suspended in the air using only the strength of his arms. Amid the bitter freezing cold of the Alps, French soldiers froze stiff with cold, morale broken, retreating in disarray, while Thomas led his loyal troops climbing sheer vertical ice cliffs, launching daring surprise assaults upon heavily fortified enemy strongholds. His fearsome reputation spread rapidly among military commanders across Europe. Nobles and generals whispered in dread of the fierce, unstoppable Black Devil on the battlefield. Yet for all his fearsome battlefield prowess, he never descended into cruelty or unnecessary brutality, clinging firmly to an old-fashioned code of chivalry long faded in the chaotic revolutionary age. After capturing occupied cities, he strictly forbade his soldiers from looting, harming civilians or destroying property, even spending his own funds to compensate local residents for wartime losses. This pure, unwavering moral integrity stood starkly out amid the chaos, greed and corruption of revolutionary France, earning him the beloved honorable nickname the Noble Alexander. In 1793, at only 31 years of age, he made history, becoming the first black divisional commander in the history of the French Republic, rising swiftly through the ranks to full general. In that triumphant moment, Thomas truly believed the revolutionary oaths of liberty, equality and justice had finally prevailed, that the scales of fairness had at last tipped toward righteousness and merit. Yet he remained unaware that within the same army a short, ambitious Corsican officer watched his rising fame, growing power and widespread admiration from the shadows. Consumed by fierce jealousy, Napoleon possessed an overwhelming hunger for control and an almost pathological vanity, unable to tolerate any figure shining brighter than himself, especially this towering, nearly 2-meter-tall black general of foreign heritage, whose unyielding, upright spirit refused to bow, flatter or submit to political influence. The Egyptian expedition of 1798 marked the fateful turning point in Thomas-Alexandre Dumas's life, planting the first deep, irreversible rift between him and Napoleon. Amid the scorching barren desert, French soldiers sank into despair, weakened by crippling thirst, starvation, exhaustion and disillusionment over pointless, endless military campaigns. As a distinguished cavalry commander, Thomas spoke openly, honestly and fearlessly during military council meetings, boldly questioning Napoleon's reckless, ambitious, expansionist policies. He told Napoleon plainly, "I do not fight to satisfy one man's personal desire for power, conquest and glory. I fight only for the liberty and freedom of France." Those unflinching, truthful words struck straight like a sharp, piercing arrow, piercing through Napoleon's growing secret ambition to claim imperial power for himself. A cold, menacing flash of silent anger crossed Napoleon's pale face as he silently marked down this unyielding, outspoken black general as an obstacle to be removed. Later, during the brutal Battle of Mantua, Thomas once again displayed mythic superhuman bravery, standing alone upon a narrow bridge, wielding a massive cavalry sword like a living statue forged from dark iron, single-handedly holding back hundreds of charging enemy soldiers. Napoleon was forced to praise his extraordinary heroism in official military dispatches, yet privately began plotting quietly to dispose of this stubborn, independent-minded tool, no longer easy to control. When the trapped expeditionary force faced desperate peril, Thomas requested permission to return to France for urgent medical recovery. Napoleon granted his request without the slightest hesitation, yet deliberately refused to provide any proper supplies, safe escort or protection, leaving him to sail back across the Mediterranean aboard an old, fragile, unseaworthy vessel. In that quiet, unthinking moment, Thomas failed to realize he was walking straight into a carefully orchestrated act of political abandonment betrayed by his own leader, he held quiet thoughts of his beloved wife and young son waiting for him back in France, unaware that iron prison bars, poison and endless suffering awaited him beyond the horizon. Out at sea, his ship was captured by reactionary forces of the Kingdom of Naples, condemning the celebrated French general to the status of a political prisoner. Meanwhile, Napoleon, now holding absolute supreme power over France, needed only a single command to rescue his loyal, heroic comrade, yet chose deliberate cold silence, allowing the forgotten warrior to vanish into the darkness of a remote seaside dungeon. Confined within the grim dungeon of Taranto in Naples, Thomas-Alexandre Dumas endured 2 full years of inhumane suffering, trapped inside a cold, damp, sunless cell, locked to the stone walls with heavy iron chains. Once the strongest, most powerful man in France, reduced to a frail, helpless shadow of himself. To completely break his resolve and crush his spirit, cruel jailers secretly laced his food with slow-acting poison, arsenic and lead, toxins that gradually corroded his organs, drained his strength, and ruined his health. He once contemplated ending his own suffering, yet the thought of his wife waiting faithfully in France and his young son he had never yet met gave him the quiet inner strength to endure and survive. He scratched faint words onto the cold stone walls, using broken fragments of stone and metal, his markings holding no curses, hatred or bitterness toward his betrayers, only quiet longing for freedom, justice and a return to his homeland. At the same time, back in Paris, Napoleon signed laws restoring slavery in French colonies, a blow to Thomas's spirit far deeper and more painful than any slow poison. When he was finally released in a prisoner exchange in 1801, the once mighty Hercules was reduced to a frail shadow of his former self, blinded in one eye, deafened in one ear, partially paralyzed down one side of his body, his once grand military uniform hanging loosely upon his gaunt, wasted frame. He returned to his hometown of Villers-Cotterets, hoping his nation would grant him the military pension, medical care and respect he had earned through decades of loyal service. Yet Napoleon issued deliberate official orders erasing all records of his military career, rank, honors and achievements, refusing to grant him even a single coin of financial support. The general who had spilled his blood, sacrificed his health and risked his life for the Republic was left destitute, forced to rely on his wife, selling off family possessions simply to buy daily bread. He spent his final years trapped in poverty, illness and quiet disillusionment, often sitting alone by his window, gazing silently toward Paris, not longing for its glittering splendor but pondering bitterly why a nation built on promises of liberty, equality and fraternity could abandon, betray and erase one of its greatest heroes. In 1806, Thomas passed away quietly at the young age of 43, dying penniless, impoverished and forgotten, leaving behind only a single treasured military sword hanging upon the wall, its blade nicked and scarred from countless brutal battles, the sole inheritance he could offer his family. After Thomas-Alexandre Dumas's death, Napoleon's government ordered his name completely erased from official imperial military rosters and historical archives. Yet political power could erase words written on paper but never erase the living memory etched deep within bloodline and heritage. His young son, only 4 years old at the time, the future world-famous writer Alexandre Dumas, forever carried the image of his father's towering, dignified figure and sad, melancholy eyes etched into his heart. Plunged into family poverty, Alexandre Dumas received almost no formal schooling growing up, yet listened endlessly to his mother recounting tales of his father's battlefield glory, heroic bridge defenses, daring alpine raids and lonely, unjust imprisonment. These vivid stories sank deep into his subconscious, shaping his imagination, moral outlook and understanding of fate, injustice, courage and resilience. Years later, when writing The Count of Monte Cristo, the wrongfully imprisoned, relentlessly resilient Edmond Dantes, trapped in the dark dungeon of the Château d'If, bore nearly identical spiritual core, life journey and tragic fate, mirroring the real suffering endured by General Thomas Dumas. The fearless, bold spirit of D'Artagnan in The Three Musketeers also reflected the youthful courage, strength and unyielding pride of his father in his prime. Alexandre Dumas once said with immense pride, "My father was the sharp, mighty sword of France, and I am merely his voice carrying his story to the world." Throughout his literary career, he dedicated his writing to delivering the most magnificent, enduring revenge of all, resurrecting his father's legacy, honor and dignity through immortal tales, ensuring the entire world would forever remember this unbroken, noble hero who maintained his dignity even amid profound suffering. Though his name stands marginalized, almost overlooked among the 600 generals honored upon the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, within the eternal halls of literature, he remains an unshakable, towering giant beyond time. This quiet inheritance, passed down through blood, memory and storytelling, stands as history's gentlest belated compensation for this long-forgotten, wronged hero. Having followed his life story to its quiet close, you now understand why the real fate of Thomas-Alexandre Dumas cuts far deeper than any fictional novel. Fictional tales follow structured logic and narrative justice, while real-life fate often bears only the cold arrogance of prejudice, politics and power. He once embraced the full heroic dreams of his revolutionary age, only to be sacrificed, discarded and erased upon the cold altar of imperial ambition. Yet was he truly forgotten? Every time readers open the Count of Monte Cristo, admiring Edmond Dante's unbreakable spirit, patience and resilience amid wrongful imprisonment, they unknowingly honor, commemorate and acknowledge the soul of this wronged black general. His life teaches us that even when the body is locked away in dark dungeons, even when achievements are erased from official records and reputation buried beneath political silence, the longing for freedom, devotion to dignity and unyielding inner strength will always take root like seeds blooming into eternal remembrance within the souls of future generations. Now you may set aside all the weariness, sorrow and grievance of your daily life. Reflect upon this general's journey, and you will realize true life glory lies not in temporary applause, fame or worldly praise, but in leaving behind a legacy that lingers in quiet remembrance long after you are gone. The wind outside has softened to a gentle calm, and the dust of history has finally settled into stillness. Tonight let this overlooked black hero watch over your dreams, guiding you toward a boundless open wilderness free from prejudice, injustice and division. All sorrows have faded into the past, all courage, dignity and spirit remain eternal in memory. May you drift into deep, serene, peaceful rest. Good night.